sort of pace myself. So I started in front of the grandstand. I went around to the far grandstand.
My dad was always a storyteller. He told us fantastical stories from his years growing up in Calgary and his time as a beat cop in the early 60s. We weren't always sure if they were true, like the one about having drinks with Pavarotti, but they always made us laugh. The one he told over and over, often at our request, was about a race he entered in high school that had a tunnel on the course. As he told it, he went into the tunnel last and came out first. As my dad's lung disease progressed, I watched as telling stories became difficult for him. Eventually, talking became too difficult, and he would sit and listen instead. With personal things, he was more comfortable using email. He emailed me on Mother's Day a few weeks before his death, though we didn't know that then. At the end of the email, he said, "Thank you for everything you've done to make my life better, especially for those things that you did after my lung disease started to take its toll. There is nobody that deserves to have a happy Mother's Day more than you." The email made me cry, even though at the time I didn't recognize it for what it was. The storyteller saying goodbye. True to form, my dad told us in an email that he was considering MAID. "It seems that life is now divided in tolerable and intolerable segments," he said. "When I feel completely exhausted, I want it to be over, since there's no hope of ever getting better. The palliative care nurse left me with some information about MAID, and I think it's time to start looking into it." I didn't know what MAID referred to, and when he said medical assistance in dying, I felt complete shock. I was relieved to know my dad could choose not to live in pain and had a way to control his death, but I couldn't bear the burden of thinking about it. My dad mentioned MAID in a few more emails in the following months, which I took to be his way of checking that we still supported his decision. We always confirmed that we did. One day, about 6 months after he first mentioned MAID, my brother called to tell me Dad had decided to go ahead the following week. The shock I felt when he first mentioned MAID was nothing compared to what I felt when I got that news. Knowing the date and time, we tried to fit as much as we could into that final chapter. We took my dad around to say goodbye to friends and visited all his local grandkids. My youngest sister came from out of town with her 3-month-old baby, so my dad got to meet the last of his 10 grandchildren. In the last couple of days, we sat around his long-term care room revisiting his stories. We laughed just as hard as we always did, even though we knew the endings. As I reflected afterward on the experience of supporting my dad, I realized that with MAID, knowing what's coming and how the story will end is both a benefit and a burden. Knowing what was coming didn't make it any easier, but we got to be part of my dad's last chapter right to the end. For him, choosing MAID meant that he was able to write the final page himself. And that's just what a storyteller would want.
And I was way behind her, but she said, "If I don't get going, this race is going to be over." So while I was in the tunnel, I passed everybody, come out the other end, way out in front, and then the guy that